Right, anti-Semitism in the UK. This is me. I've lived in Manchester since I was 2 years old, but I'd had nothing to do with the Jewish community apart from having some friends at school and a friend who was Jewish at university and clients who were Jewish. But I'd never set foot inside a synagogue until I got involved with the Muslim Jewish Forum. And one of the very first things we did, in fact, was a visit to a synagogue and a visit to a mosque. As well as being co-chair of the Muslim Jewish Forum, I also chair the Muslim interest grouping inside the Conservative Party, the Conservative Muslim Forum, and I'm on the Consultative Council of the Three Faiths Forum. And thanks to, I can now say who it is because I know and it's no longer a state secret, thanks to Jackie Lewis, who nominated me, and other people who signed letters of support, in the Queen's Birthday Honours List I got an MBE, and I was specifically listed as Mohammed Amin, co-chair of the Muslim Jewish Forum of Greater Manchester, so it's quite clear where it came from. And it was for services to community cohesion and interfaith relations in Greater Manchester. So what am I going to talk about? First of all, I want to talk about the relative incidence of anti-Semitism and anti-Muslim hatred in the UK. I'm not going to talk about anti-Muslim hatred in any greater detail than that, because that's David Barclay's job. But I just want to do a comparison of the relative levels, because when I did that earlier this year, for a talk I did in Bradford, it really has a very powerful message. Then the trend of anti-Semitism, the identities of perpetrators, and then I want to discuss a very topical and very difficult subject, which is when does being anti-Israeli in some way, anti-Zionist, anti-Zionism, when does it become anti-Semitism? And then I'll take all the questions and answers at the end, preferably, just makes it easier and quicker. So, the relative incidence. The key message is that anti-Semitism is 22 times as bad as anti-Muslim hatred, if you go by reported statistics. And what I did was I looked at the report from the Community Security Trust, which monitors anti-Semitism, for calendar 2014. And the nearest comparison I could find for that was a report from Tel Mama, which monitors anti-Muslim hatred for the 12 months to 28th of February 2015. So almost overlapping periods. The CST had 1,179 incidents, Tel Mama had 548. That might be because the CST is better at capturing incidents and reporting, and I can't measure how that much might be, but I'm just taking the numbers as they stand. But then if you look at the number of Muslims and Jews in the UK, there are more than 10 times as many Muslims in the UK as there are Jews. So in terms of people per incident, you're comparing 223 Jews with 4,927 Muslims. And that effectively means that anti-Semitism is 22 times as prevalent in the Jewish community as anti-Semitism is amongst Muslims, in terms of how people suffer. And it's quite telling when you sort of look at that figure. You know, there really is a lot of anti-Semitism about, in comparison to other kinds of hatred. Trends. The CST, in its 2015 report, had a 10-year look back. I think they always have 10 years worth of historic figures. And you can see a sharp spike there, and that was a result of Operation Cast Lead, because the CST definitely finds that when there is something, normally some kind of violent conflict in the Middle East going on involving Israel, that causes an upsurge in anti-Jewish hatred in the UK. It shouldn't, but it does. And Operation Cast Lead, there was a very big spike, which then died down, and in fact 2013 was quite a low year. In 2014, there was a big spike again because there was a lot of conflict in Gaza, Operation Protective Edge from memory, in the summer of 2014, and then it went down again. Now, the other issue though is this showing an overall rising trend? Because we're going from about 400, 600 a year to what looks like a much higher average level. And the answer is I can't tell, because the reporting methods have changed. The police both Greater Manchester Police and the London Metropolitan Police in particular have got much more organised at recording anti-Semitic attacks themselves and sharing that information with the CST. The CST is quite good at making sure they don't duplicate it. So if somebody reports the same incident to the CST and to the police, they've got methodologies in place for eliminating that. But the key point is that in the past, there were no police numbers in there. Now we've got numbers from the police and numbers from the CST. Different incidents, but nevertheless, because there's a more thorough reporting mechanism, I'm not convinced that it's actually going up, apart from the spikes that you get when there's conflict. Who are the perpetrators? This is a question that is regularly asked. And the CST, when people are reporting, ask, who do you think, can you describe the person who did it? In lots of cases, obviously, there is no information. Twitter abuse. You can't trust anything that's said on a Twitter profile. Most of the worst abusers are using anonymous Twitter accounts. You can almost never tell somebody's religion. Just because somebody's brown doesn't guarantee that they're Muslim, for example. And of the 924 cases that the CST had in 2015, in only 360 cases is there any information about the description of the perpetrator. And of these perpetrators, the numbers are there: 192 white North European, 15 white Southern European, 46 black, 77 South Asian, 3 East or Southeast Asian, and 27 Arab or North African. But no information about religion. My own view, though, is that I think you can tell something about religion in reality, because it's a reasonably safe assumption that most of the South Asian perpetrators were Muslims. You just don't get that many devout Hindus who suffer from anti-Semitism in practice. And the 27 Middle Easterners, yes, there are some Arab Christians, but not very many. Most Arabs tend to be Muslim, apart from those who might be called atheists. And of course, this 77 and 27 excludes any black people. Black people from Nigeria, from Uganda, are often Muslims. And any sort of Hindus or Arab Christians who might be hiding in those numbers, I think are at least compensated by any Muslims that might be buried in those numbers. So I think it's reasonable to take the 77 and the 27 as being Muslim. And in 360 people, that is 28%. And then remind yourself that Muslims are only 5% of the UK. So 28% of known perpetrators are Muslims, on reasonable assumptions, whereas only 5% of people in the UK are Muslims. So unfortunately, I think anti-Semitism is overrepresented, which is the correct statistical phrase, amongst British Muslims.
Probably need to change it slightly because you need to map where Jewish people on incidents occur against where Muslims live, and probably in those areas you have slightly high percentage of Muslims, but still it's...
Yeah. And I'm a great believer in always facing up to reality, because you can't take decisions or move forwards if you're sort of kidding yourself regarding the facts. Now, I want to change tack completely and address the question of when does anti-Zionism become anti-Semitism? Because this is often controversial, often misunderstood, and people on both sides of the divide, both sides of the sort of Israel-Palestine dispute, consciously choose to misrepresent the arguments for political purposes. Here's one possible proposition, and I've had this put to me, that anybody who is anti-Zionist is automatically anti-Semitic. That proposition, you won't be surprised, was put by somebody in London who is extremely active in the Zionist movement. An alternative proposition is that there are lots of anti-Zionist people who are not anti-Semitic, as well as people who are anti-Zionist and anti-Semitic. By the way, I ignore the question of people who are anti-Semitic while being pro-Zionist. I don't believe those people exist. They're like unicorns. If you hate Jews, you don't like Israel. It's just logical, as far as I'm concerned. So, Yes, if you hate Jews, I think you also hate Israel. I don't believe that there are any people in this world who are anti-Semitic but pro-Israeli.
Well, we can talk about that in the discussion,
Right,
because I
yeah.
think that's an intriguing question.
Yes, I know you think about some of these extreme Christian Zionists. Yeah,
I think they're anti-Semitic in their eschatology.
right. So, which of those two propositions is correct is up for debate. And the first thing you need to do is to think of some definitions. Because while Shami Chakrabarti thinks she can write a report about anti-Semitism in the Labour Party without bothering with a definition of anti-Semitism, I think you do need a definition of anti-Semitism if you're going to make progress on issues like this. And what I'm happy to use is the working definition of the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance that they adopted earlier this year, which actually is identical in wording to the old EU monitoring centre definition.
It's very similar.
No, I've checked the words. I've checked they're identical. Yeah. So it's a certain perception of you. The EU Monitoring Centre definition of that 2003, because the actual definition is only this operative bit. All the rest of it is explanatory materials. And it's a mental state about Jews. That anti-Semitism is something you have inside your head. It's what you think or believe about Jews. And then it's how do you manifest it? You manifest it by direct hatred of real Jewish people or Jewish property. So throwing a brick through a synagogue window is an anti-Semitic attack, even if you don't hit a person. A harder one, yeah. Pardon?
That's what, there's no in addition there, which is the other bit.
Right.
So it's only half of the. In addition, such manifestations could also target the state of Israel, constitute a Jewish collectivity, and such freely charged Jews on the grounds of harm humanity.
Those are all possible explanations.
Part of the original definition. That's what I was saying.
We can argue about that separately. Zionism is a more challenging one. What does one mean by being anti-Zionist? Well, first of all, before you can think about being anti-Zionist, you have to think about what being Zionist means. And Zionism, I believe, is in the mission statement of the World Zionist Organization right back to 1897, and it's a program to establish a Jewish home in Palestine, Eretz Israel. Now, of course, you can argue, and I've had this argument put to me quite logically, that once Israel has been established, the Zionist mission has been accomplished, so being Zionist or anti-Zionist no longer actually means anything. But nevertheless, there are organizations in the UK which call themselves Zionist organizations which support this program, and therefore, logically, if you're against this in some way, and we'll talk in a minute about what being against this in some way might mean, then you're anti-Zionist. And what is anti-Zionism? I think there are lots of alternative ways of being anti-Zionist. Because if you go back to the definition of Zionism, that's what the program is. But once the state of Israel exists, the question is, what do you do with it if you're anti-Zionist? And I've got some alternative formulations. I've got three, A, B, C. I'm not saying these are exclusive. I'm sure you could come up with C, D, E, F as well if you wanted to. But I've just written down these three as an illustration. So the first one is, if you believe, and as indeed I do, that you couldn't accomplish the original Basel program without infringing the rights of the Palestinians who were already there, if you believe that wrongs occurred, actually I think there were wrongs on both sides, but on the other hand, you may also be willing to accept that Israel exists, and that it's a fact which can't be reversed, and that therefore its borders need to be defined, and Palestinians should have a state as well. It doesn't actually say that on there, but that's what it goes on. So that's one kind of anti-Zionism, which in particular says that you need a deal with the Palestinians, and a 1949 armistice line should be the starting point of the negotiations. Won't win you any friends with Benjamin Netanyahu, but it is a position. And I call that anti-Zionism A. Here's another alternative version of anti-Zionism, which is that you think that so much of the West Bank has been encroached upon by Israeli settlements, that it's no longer possible to separate Israelis and Palestinians, and that therefore there should be a single unitary binational state from the Mediterranean to the Jordan, even if that eventually means that the Arabs outnumber the Jews. Because if you add up the Arabs in the West Bank and in Gaza, particularly if Arab refugees in Lebanon, Arab refugees in Syria were allowed to come back, eventually there's a strong likelihood that there will be an Arab majority and the Jews will be outnumbered. That's anti-Zionism B, advocating a unitary state. And then anti-Zionism C, and I wrote this before I came across the tweet from Nashar MP, where you believe that the immigration of European Jews and Jews from Arab countries into Palestine was so wrong that it should be reversed and that they should be expelled. Remember, Nashar's tweet involved deporting all 6 million Jewish Israelis to the United States of America. So this is anti-Zionism C. So we've got three alternative formulations of anti-Zionism. Now, anti-Zionism A, in my view, is like this. Simply, if you believe that there should be a two-state solution and that the West Bank should be given back to the Palestinians, that's a position that is argued for in many parts of the political spectrum. Some of the people who hold anti-Zionism A will still be anti-Semitic. You can be a believer in the two-state solution and still be anti-Semitic if you simply hate Jews. But there will be plenty of people who are anti-Zionist A without being anti-Semitic. The relative proportion, I don't know. Anti-Zionism B, supporting a unitary state, there are a couple of alternative ways of thinking about it. Could be like this, where the people genuinely support a unitary state, but they don't hate Jews. Alternatively, they could be people who are supporting a unitary state because they know that eventually, and not too far away, there'll be an Arab majority, and they really do hate Jews, or almost all of them hate Jews. Which of those two is correct is a matter of fact-finding. You have to go around and ask the supporters of a unitary state what they think, or more. You don't just ask them, do you hate Jews? You give them other tests, you find out if they've got Jewish friends, you find out what they've written, tweeted, etc. in the past. But it's an empirical question. I can't answer from first principles whether most supporters of a unitary state are anti-Semitic or whether they're not. Anti-Zionism C, I think I can answer. I think anybody who wants to deport all the Jews out of Israel hates Jews. So if you support anti-Zionism C, then I think you're also anti-Semitic. And so there's no easy answer as to when anti-Zionism becomes anti-Semitism. It depends very much on what the person means by saying that they're anti-Zionist, because people will hold up flags, saying we are anti-Zionist without ever writing down in detail what they mean by being anti-Zionist, or they call themselves anti-Israeli without saying what they mean by being anti-Israeli. And you need to really deconstruct that and analyze it before you can decide whether or not the position they're taking is an anti-Semitic position. That's all that I wanted to say